all the listeners and the viewers, welcome to CEC Gurukul Live Lectures. The topic of discussion and learning today is industrial revolutions and global politics. How we plan to take the learning forward today is we shall try to understand what have been the various phases of industrial revolutions. What do these phases have had and the kind of implications for international relations and conduct of global politics, the kind of challenges and concepts this idea of movements in industrial revolution has presented to mankind. And then we shall try to look at the very fact that today world is glaring towards Industrial Revolution 4.0. Keeping that in mind, what are the challenges that are ahead and the opportunities that one can take forward in the understanding of global politics? Now, when we try to look at industrial revolutions and global politics, let's begin by understanding the various phases of industrial revolution. Now, the first phase, this was roughly until the beginning of the Middle Ages. What kind of system prevailed? It was a self-sufficient system, which can be also called as a family system. How did this system move forward? Something like it consumed all it produced. So therefore, collective production and consumption were the defining features of first phase of industrial revolution. There was simple division of labor amongst the various members of the family. So therefore, the first phase, wherein you have a self-sufficient family system, consumption and production balancing each other. With this, humanity witnessed the second phase, wherein you can say some of the defining features were the guilds increased. There was increase in growth of towns. Somewhere there was focus on specialization of some particular work. People of same interest united together. There were associations, for example, association for specialized activities like weavers, carpenters, cobblers association. So therefore, second phase of industrial revolution sees a leap from what the first phase was, primarily about being a family-oriented system wherein consumption and production were equivalent to each other. As time moved forward, second phase sees increase in guilds, growth of towns, specialization, people of all interests coming together, associations, to name a few. Now, once this second phase comes forward, what you see here is that people used to work in their own houses with their own materials and disposed of the products which was made by them in their own shops. So therefore, market in this phase of second industrial phase of industrial revolution, market was small. Market was often very near to where population resided. The craftsman was in direct touch with the consumer. With this, time made the leap for third phase. Workers were having their own tools. Input raw materials were supplied by intermediators. In this phase, what you find that output products produced was sold to the consumer by these intermediators. Now, intermediators in this third phase, what we will be studying, they came to be known as merchants. and the system was known as the cottage system. So what you see here is the evolution of the method of doing work is gradually increasing as well as changing. First phase, family system. Second phase, handicraft system, the guild system. Third phase, what you can see here is the cottage system. So therefore, work responded as per to the needs of the time. Forces of production and distribution evolved as per these various degrees of phases. Now, the fourth phase, wherein there is a lot of differentiation, lot of study, the factory system. This factory system developed because of industrial revolution. What was this industrial revolution about? How do we define it? Industrial revolution implied complete change in the methods of production of goods. So therefore, this industrial revolution was marked by certain kind of parameters. What are those parameters? Let's understand. There were technological and economic changes. These technological and economic changes were defined by strength and speed. There was modern large-scale production and definite evolution of business organizations. Now, within this, industrial and economic developments, which were a byproduct of industrial revolutions, brought significant social changes. There was industrialization because there was growth of industry in every sector. New forms of methods of work were being devised, wherein which industries were given an opportunity to flourish. With the passage of time, there was increase in population. More people implied more jobs needed to cater to livelihood of mankind. And with this industrialization and increase in population, there was the phenomena of urbanization. Urban centers came up. More people moved to cities for a better life and means of livelihood. So people moved to urban centers in search of employment. But at the same time, we have to understand that industrial revolution was somewhere a phenomena which has led to certain very interesting questions for humanity at large. That is, the prosperous industrialists were growing, they were accumulating great wealth, but at the same time, the working class was living with minimum comforts. If to understand industrial revolution, we can take an alternative perspective also, that is of Karl Marx. That is, that when he gives the clarion call saying, "Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains," he was pointing towards how in various phases of history, mankind has been divided into two groups: the haves, the rich, the haves not, the poor. That is, when you look at the Greek society, society was divided into freemen and slaves. When you look at the Roman society, Roman times, society was divided into patricians and plebeians. When you look at the feudal society, society was divided into vassals and serfs. When you look at the industrial society, society was divided into factorymen and workers and labor. And what was the defining criteria of this division? It was the means of economic resources. Who controls the forces of production and distribution? So therefore, no doubt, Industrial Revolution in its fourth phase, being guided by technological advancements, led to increase in industrialization, rise in urbanization, increase in population. But at the same time, one must take into account that how people move to urban centers. Within this, there was this other paradigm of division of society and economy, that is rich versus the poor. Now let's understand and bring in the international relations perspective. 1660 and 1815, if you look at this time framework, Great Britain was world's leading power. It had commercial and military power. It also surpassed European rivals and all other national economies around the world. Now, at the same time, we have to take into account that Britain's long transition to geopolitical and economic primacy also had another implication, that 19th century Britain definitely witnessed political unrest too, as urbanization and industrialization presented new challenges and created a need for social and political change. So therefore, Pax Britannicana, the idea of British supremacy in global affairs, also had challenges at the domestic frontiers, wherein 19th century Britain witnessing political unrest because of forces of industrialization and urbanization, and therefore there was an entire atmosphere that was created for the need for social and political changes. Because let's understand, increasing demands for improved social welfare, education of children, labor rights, the demands for political rights, equality, and also the calls for abolition of slave trade, the representations being made for changes in the electoral system. So what you see here is that global politics, therefore, even in this time, somewhere did not exist in vacuum. Because of societal pressures of industrial revolution, industrialization, there was this offset of demands, namely social welfare, education, political rights, amongst others. Now what you see here is that it had implications also. Let's understand, slave trade was abolished in 1807. Great Reform Act was passed by the British Parliament in 1832, and after this Reform Act, manufacturing cities such as Birmingham, Manchester could be represented in Parliament for the first time. So therefore, what you see here is there were substantial changes in the character of parliamentary politics. Scientific innovations and technological improvements definitely presented more for everyone to take into account, and therefore industrial revolution, what we will be seeing in later phases of global politics, these pressing questions, these developments always present new challenges as well as opportunities to cater to. Now, with increase of capital, there was need for credit, and therefore what one sees here is banking developed in cities and as well as countryside. Provincial banks and issue of paper money in the form of bills of exchange and notes come forwards. So therefore there was this entire change in the financial terrain of global politics also. At the same time, when you look at the British maritime hegemony, when we try to understand it with how Britain had an edge in terms of economic superiority, this definitely had a bearing on what we say relationship between power and plenty. And this relationship between power and plenty was even feared at the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and even has implications when we look at the trade war going on in the contemporary world scenario, when we look at new forms of power, namely innovation, technology that comes up. So therefore, Industrial Revolution definitely had a huge bearing on international relations, global businesses, amongst others, and the impact of this bearing has become unprecedented today. Therefore, neither domestic politics of any nation nor business scenario of any country and neither in global international relations can afford to ignore it. Now, when we try to understand Industrial Revolution, a very important ideology comes with it, that is of laissez-faire. This ideology, the kind of perspectives and viewpoints it presents to us, it has a huge bearing on the lives of everyday citizen also. Laissez-faire is a French phrase. It translates to leave us alone. It is a political ideology that rejects government intervention in an economy. Laissez-faire looks at state as a obstacle, we say. It wants states to provide with the basic law and order apparatus, but however, state should refrain from interference in the market. Laissez-faire originated in the 18th century, and this was during the Industrial Revolution. Now, French industrialists, they were looking at government's voluntary aid to promote business in the country. And at this hour, let's present an interesting fact to you. The French businessman M.L. Gendre responded to a mercantilist minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, with the idea of laissez-faire, that is, maximum freedom for the market, giving prevalence to individual freedom, somewhere reducing the role of the state and looking at state somewhere as what we can say as a unnecessary evil. Now, as contrast to laissez-faire is the other perspective of mercantilism. And dear listeners, dear viewers, dear learners, this debate between free market with respect to a strong state is continuing even today. Let's understand the mercantilist perspective. Mercantilism tries to give a idea of economic nationalism, building a wealthy and powerful state. Mercantilism coined the term mercantile system. An important economist whose ideas are often used to contrast the mercantilist perspective, Adam Smith. Adam Smith, when he's trying to talk about laissez-faire, he's trying to talk about, how we must restrain imports and encourage exports. Mercantilist system, or what we say is economic nationalist system, dominated Western European economic thoughts and policies from 16th to the late 18th century. Now, this brings us to an important question that we must look into. What was the rationale? What were the reasons that led to flourishing of mercantilism in the 16th century? And these questions have a bearing on when we put up the question, what is the rationale for prevailing and propagation of protectionism as an ideology to be looked upon? First of all, we have to see that in the 16th century, there was consolidation of the regional power centers of the feudal era by large competitive nation states. There was growth of European commerce and industry relative to agriculture. There was increase in the volume and breadth of the trade, and increase in the use of metallic monetary system, particularly gold and silver, relative to what was existing earlier, that is the barter transaction. During the mercantilist period, military conflict between the nation states also was often there. Now, therefore, there was need for sufficient quality of hard currency to support military in order to deter attacks. So, therefore, mercantilism and the economics thereof was serving politics. Creation of wealth definitely underlied the state power. So, what you see here is again that mercantilism helped states. It achieved prominence several hundred years ago, and let's understand that 19th century definitely witnessed the decline of Pax Britannicana. The idea of favorable balance, that is positive balance of trade versus negative balance of trade, was therefore later made to think upon. At this time, another perspective that is essential for us to look at the Industrial Revolution scenario was liberalism. It says there that it shares the assumption of anarchy. Realists have always dislodged have been skeptical of the idea of cooperation. For realists, it is statism leading to self-help leading to survival. But liberals camp, which gives primacy to freedom, generally share the assumption of anarchy, but however, they do not see this condition as precluding extensive cooperation to realize common gains. Liberalism holds that by building international organizations like United Nations, institutions like World Bank, IMF, Bretton Woods regimes, norms of cooperation, of peace, states can mutually benefit from economic exchanges. And at this time, we have to see that when we are trying to look at the industrial scenario juxtaposed with global politics, both liberalism and mercantilism, they are theories of economics and ideologies that have definitely shaped states' policies. Now, an important work which we must take into account when we are trying to understand liberalism with respect to larger industrial scenario and economics thereof, Wealth of Nations. This magnus opus was presented to us by Adam Smith, who argued that wealth was not in gold but in the productive capacities of economies. He emphasized free market, laissez-faire approach to economics, which definitely had a bearing on state politics and global issues also. As compared to Adam Smith, the economist David Ricardo, who stressed on comparative advantage, saying that states should produce wherein they have an advantage in and trade with other states. Now, 1730s, again, if we are trying to look at the world history, economic history with respect to global politics, Europe and America, they were agrarian society. Farming was the main occupation, wherein land was used to make money. With the introduction of spinning loom, engines, steam engines, there was enhanced in development, and this is what industrial revolution ushered in. As advancement of industrial technology, urbanization that we just saw, led to development of densities what we say were the first world cities: New York, Philadelphia, London, to name a few. Colonialism effectively spread the idea of capitalism around the world. Today, when we look at new colonialism, the second wave of imperialism in the 19th and 20th century, which effectively spread capitalist political economy throughout the globe to countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America too. So therefore what we see here is that the processes of industrialization, industrial technology, industrial revolutions somewhere had a drawback also, that is of rich versus poor, extraction from the poor nations for the rich nations. And this somewhere what we have seen in the world history of colonialism, today it has taken a new form of neo-colonialism. So what we see here is that extraction from Africa, Asia, Pacific with the same European powers and new powers. Who are the same European powers in global history? British, French, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, and the new powers, Germany, Belgium, and the United States, that we saw playing an important role in global politics after the Second World War. So at the same time, Industrial Revolution had an implication for societal processes too, and this implication has acquired a global connotation. Women's role have changed drastically. Instead of just staying at home, women have ventured out in the arena of jobs and employment. Nurses, teachers, rise of women's suffrage movement, all of it happened, and at the same time gender variable was made to understand how industrial scenario as well as the global politics somewhere gave more importance to male versus female because of construct wherein biology was used to somewhere take aback a certain segment of population. That is how women were underpaid compared to their male counterparts and could not at all at times even take jobs. So what you see here is 1750, Britain had the world's most advanced economy. We have studied how it had industrialization. There was free trade. Today, largest and most economy, world's advanced economy belongs to the United States. There is industrialization, but at the same time, this is different from Pax Britannicana, because though industrialization was the guiding phenomena for Britain, territorial expansion has been the ideal method also for global politics. Now, Keynesian economics prevailed, and after that what you see here is world sees in some time the Second World War, and with this the Soviet bloc coming forward with the idea of centrally planned economy during the Cold War. It presented the idea of state-owned industry. Now, Cold War, as we all know, there was no actual war. It was more like a propaganda war. Cold War had three phases: the rise, detent, and the dissolution of USSR and the end of Cold War. Today, world has witnessed a leap. World economic scenario has witnessed change from a Keynesian economics to the idea of centrally planned economy of Soviet style. Today we are witnessing the rise of single integrated world economy that almost no country can resist joining. And within this single integrated world economy, one has to understand Industrial Revolution 4.0 and the kinds of challenges it presents to us. Today, multinational corporations, MNCs, that is firms based in one state that own, manage and their affiliates, branches or subsidiaries in two or more countries. they have become an important non-state actor which any country cannot afford to ignore. So at the same time, what you see here is capitalism. What is a capitalism? Let us understand that. An economic system. It is often taken as a form of political economy. It is also considered a mode of production that emphasizes money, market-oriented trade, capital investment in order to enhance production. Capitalism presents to us a certain set of values or culture which legitimate market-oriented behavior. Now, capitalism replaces feudalism, if we look at the world global economic history, as the dominant form of political economy roughly in the late Middle Ages. Feudalism was an economic system composed of diverse group of governmental units, wherein which what we see here is that today, when we look at the world economic scenario, there are codified values to judge a country's performance, and there's a debate whether these indicators actually reflect the working conditions and the real picture of the economy at large. So what you see here is we have GDP, gross domestic product, which is a more refined measure that subtracts national earnings from foreign investment. So therefore, when you look at GDP, there's another variable, that is GNP, in order to look at the foreign investment earning. So GDP is GNP minus foreign investment earning. But sadly, neither GNP nor GDP accurately account for all the commercial transactions, because certain times what is excluded are goods and services not traded in the marketplace, perhaps something like a parallel economy, some features of informal economy, underground, or at times even the black market, household production and consumption. So when you look at these factors, therefore, when we try to quantify the impact of industrial revolution and industrialization thereof, there are challenges which one has to take into account. So therefore, quantification of capitalism then is a challengeable variable. Now, one sociologist who presented to us a good insight into capitalism, that was Max Weber. And this is very important for us to understand, because it is the same time where an industrial revolution was flourishing. The German sociologist Max Weber saw that emergence of capitalism was accompanied by new set of social values that are supported by market-oriented trade as well as savings and investment. The culture of religion, that was Protestant ethics, was central to his ideas. Now, therefore, what you see here is that attempts after the Second World War have been made to organize international trade and monetary regimes such as the GATT, WTO, IMF. Globalization is transforming not only trade but also money, operation of business, enhancing level of integration, increasing communication, presenting new ideas and challenges for environmental management, and putting up issues for economic development of the poor countries. And industrialization in contemporary time, therefore, then gets to have a huge bearing on global politics also. Today, what you see here is the globe is divided into north and south. And this north-south division, the level of industrialization has an important role to play. The north, that is the rich, the first world country, marked by high income levels, high standard of living, highly urbanized. The south, the third world, poorer developing states, has a much lower standard of living, consumption level are less, and therefore they are less urbanized. So therefore, globalization of the world economy, and which had again a link with the patterns of industrialization and industrial revolutions too, had a backlash in many parts of the world. So therefore, when we look at the idea of growing protectionism and economic nationalism, the competition from low wage countries in the global south, when we look at the impact on wages in other countries, there were debates on the standard of labor regulation, what were the challenges for worker safety on the industrial workplace, the debate on unfettered trade expansion leading to benefit for some and huge loss for many have been taken into account. The idea of challenges from human rights regime, minimum wage issues, the protests against child labor, the need to have worker safety and better management of environmental issues are new challenges that have been laid on the patterns of industrialization which have been impacted by globalization. So therefore, when we look at the final aspect of our lecture, the fourth industrial revolution, or when we look at industrial revolution 4.0, that something that you pick up any newspaper today, be it and look at the business columns or look at the international relations column, this is something that is being often debated. Let's understand, how do you define industrial revolution? This is characterized by a fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between physical, digital and biological sphere. I use this definition from World Economic Forum. That is, technology is fueling blockchains, big data, smartphones. We are having an app for every need, YouTube, rise of unfettered communications. All these are parts of a syndrome, a world scenario where there's blurring of space-time distinction, and at the same time physical, digital and biological spheres too are casting new, are having the bearing of this fusion of technology. As we saw in the lecture, industrial revolution happened in various phases, right from the family system to the guild system to the cottage system to the handicraft system to the factory system. What differentiates this revolution from the others? We have an important question that we must take into account. Now see, with each revolution, there have been worries over who would gain from new technologies and who would be left on the sidelines. What is happening here is that with the rise of big data, analytics, machine learning, the buzzword here is that there is no doubt huge changes in every aspect of technology that we not only deal in our daily lives but has a huge implications for security, power, national interest, international business world over. Our interactions with machines and information are much more rampant and much more powerful. Today, there is a quest to put nations on the digitalization track. Today, there is an attempt to link governance with participatory models using technology. Today, there is an attempt to have better health scenario with new forms of medical equipments. So what you see here is that our interactions with machines and information is rampant and more powerful, and this has a bearing on global politics too. For example, they have today technology has a mark on everything. Others have helped companies to tap into consumer relationships, behaviors, location, innermost thoughts in the most powerful and often disturbing ways. So what you see here is that there is massive cultural and structural differences between information technology too. Some countries have all the access, whereas other countries do not have all the access. Operational technology and industrial automation are presenting new challenges for global business scenario as well as global politics. Leadership is technology driven now. Innovation is the new hallmark for economic and military power. Global competition is prevalent in the technology sector, and this tech sector leadership is intensifying with time. There is scaling of breakthrough technologies, and amidst all this, the variables of global politics, power, national interest, survival are existing, and this has a huge bearing because no country can afford to live in vacuum. We may think about protectionist model, but this still we are living in a world which is marked by a decent degree of interconnections. So therefore, technology has become a new ingredient how states gain, use or lose power. We are all living in a world which is being defined by interconnected elements, and within this interconnected elements, statism, survival leading to self-help, what realists taught is being defined not in the sense of fear of being conquered, but the fear of being left behind. There are new standards and norms for this thorny tech governance which are presenting to us questions. That is, let's look at genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and all countries at various forums and summits trying to factor in their industrial policy, industrial workforce scenario, as well as in their foreign affairs apparatus too. There are issues that is of ethics, that is, can we just blindly take into this industrial revolution 4.0 without looking into sustainability? Worries about the pace at which this change is happening, that is, every new day new technology comes and the old technology which was recently discovered is becoming redundant. So therefore, this move to industry 4.0 has a bearing not only for international business but also for our global affairs, because this move to industry 4.0, besides throwing up ethical questions and presenting to us anxieties about the pace at which change is happening, this move to industry 4.0 is much faster than we are used to reaching into just about every sector. Rapid destruction is redefining the contours of manpower, workforce, work culture, global business relations, global international relations, because you are expect to keep regulating yourself in order to keep pace. Such kind of fast disruption was not prevalent in earlier phases of industrial revolution, and this has magnified in the present times, which we often say is that there is rapid disruption. The gains from this new public offerings at the same time sadly accrue to few stakeholders. And at the same time, there are debates. For example, when we look at the rise of robotics, artificial intelligence and their ilk, there are fears. Will they wipe out some jobs? Will this new technological infiltration or penetration wipe out jobs for the labor? Then there is this entire data that is coming up and fears on non-voluntary fractional employment, and this non-voluntary fractional employment has a bearing on soft power of any country. And of course, there are reports that even hugely profitable tech companies, they are employing more contract employees on their payrolls, and this definitely has a bearing not only for the domestic scenario of a country but also on the operation of global forces in a larger international terrain-scape. So therefore, when we try to look at what is it, how do we situate global politics, international business and domestic issues also, when we are trying to look at challenges of Industry 4.0, we have to see that it is offering amazing possibilities for everything from manufacturing to medicine. We are seeing that there are new forms of production units that are coming up in the manufacturing realm. There are new forms that are being tapped in the realm of medicine, because as we enjoy the gains from new industrial revolution, we should be more cognizant that has been true in the past about its possible spin-off effects. We have to see, and I present to you this very interesting opinion, and that is by Linda Nazareth, that is from the Globe and the Mail. It was recently published, that this may be the most revolutionary revolution of them all would serve us, but it is very essential to see that it will inevitably have an impact well beyond just talking toasters. So what you see here is that today the world has witnessed change. Today global politics has witnessed change, and within this industrial revolutions have always had an impact. Industrial revolution from its earlier phases has been seen in the form of Industry 4.0. No doubt the world economy has witnessed a leap from what we saw during the Second World War, from what we saw during the Cold War, and to what we see in the contemporary globalization. Industry always witnessed a backlash, and today this idea of integrated world economy witness backlash too. There are issues that were debated earlier, that is laissez-faire versus economic nationalism. So similarly, there is a debate, globalization versus deglobalization versus reglobalization, growing nationalism and economic protectionism, the issues of labor, safety and regulation, the idea of unfettered trade expansion, the issues of environment and worker safety and children and human rights. All these have an important bearing on how Industry 4.0 will flourish, and this will be definitely linked to international relations too, because relationship between power and plenty has always been a defining criteria of global politics. So what you see here is, with this fourth industrial revolution coming forward, seeing a fusion of technologies, space-time compression, blurring lines between physical, digital and biological spheres. Today, within this paradigm, every country has to resituate its domestic working of governments and trying to see where does then it place itself in the larger global political economy scenario. No doubt, revolutions in the industrial sphere have always been there, but what is different in this Industry 4.0 is because it presents to us new challenges and worries and anxieties as to how to gain from change which is happening all the time, how to gain from new technologies, and there will be issue as to who would be left on the sidelines in case one does not catch up on the intense competition and innovative scenario. So what you see here is that with big data, analytics, machine learning becoming the buzzwords of the huge changes that we are seeing in our everyday lives, as well as how interaction with machines and information have enhanced and presented challenges for our industries, industrial scenario, human power, manpower and global politics also. So therefore we have to see how relationships are being restructured and how technology being having a mark on everything presents to us new challenges which any leader in the global sphere cannot ignore. So what you see here is innovation is becoming the new hallmark of economic, military power, and therefore one has to see how to juxtapose this ingredient in this realm when states strive out to gain, use or lose power. There we are living in a times which are strange yet interconnected, and therefore our global business and global politics are in this quest of the fear of being left out, and therefore new forms of mechanisms of operations have to be worked out in order to cater to, because there are worries about the pace at which the change is happening. So we're living in certain strange time which is being defined by rapid disruption, but at the same time this time has positives as well as negatives. It has enabled us as well as at the same time it has somewhere had a new kind of impact for awareness, informational, empowered society too. So therefore, when you try to look at Industry 4.0, no doubt it is presenting to us new horizons to cater to, no doubt it is presenting to us new challenges, but the gains from new public offerings accrue to few stakeholders. There are new fears, and within all this you have to see that the silver lining in the cloud, or what we say as the conclusion, that it has great chances for everyone, for every sector, and we have to mentor ourselves, guard ourselves to enjoy gains from this new Industry 4.0, and also be aware of the fact of the spillover effect this regime can bring in. No doubt we are witnessing new revolutionary times wherein we have to see that today the world has to think about adapting itself to this new phase, because the idea of doing away with gains of interconnectedness is never a good idea. So therefore, here we are living in a world defined by Industry 4.0, and this Industry 4.0 has a huge bearing on international business and global politics, which students, media, academia, researchers, global political leaders should and must take into account how to factor in the gains, how to cater to the challenges as well as the opportunities.